That morning in Gleeful City started off peaceful, at least for those who hadn't looked up yet. Summer sunlight poured down the sidewalks, filtered through green leaves, and reflected off glass buildings like sheets of crystal. On the stone-paved sidewalk, Thomas and Charles were just stepping out of the bakery, each holding a hot sandwich. The smell of butter lingered in the air. "Hey, Charles," Thomas chewed loudly, squinting up at the sky. "You seeing what I'm seeing?" Charles glanced up, swallowed hard, and his eyes nearly popped out of his head. Floating high above the city, nestled in the blue sky, was a massive red sphere, shiny, glowing, and absurdly large. Too big to be a balloon, too tense to be a blimp, and way too weird to be anything ordinary. Thomas's mouth dropped open. "Is that a water balloon, like a real water balloon?" A faint hissing sound echoed through the streets. For a moment, everything fell silent. The wind stopped. A lone pigeon flying across the sky suddenly swerved in panic. Crack! The sharp sound rang out like a giant bone snapping. Instinctively, Thomas took a half-step back. He didn't even know why. It was just something deep in his gut. Charles grabbed Thomas's sleeve. "Run, run now!" Thomas stammered. "Is that Choo Choo's balloon? No way. He didn't actually—" But there was no more time to guess. A deep rumbling boom shook the air like thunder in slow motion. The balloon, no, the sky itself, burst open in a roar of rushing water. Everything slowed down. The world dipped into slow motion. Millions of gallons of water came crashing down in one terrifying wave. Buildings shuddered, glass shattered, cars were lifted and flung like plastic toys. A city bus tumbled mid-air before smashing into a grassy roundabout, its wheels still spinning like it hadn't noticed anything happened. Thomas was swept off his feet. For a split second as he floated mid-air, he didn't scream. He just watched. His brain captured everything. The sunlight dancing through the downpour, the chaos below, the panic, the sheer madness of it all. It was so absurd that his mind couldn't decide if it was real or just a dream. Then, splash, cold water. Thomas was submerged, gasping, flailing. Street signs floated past like seaweed. A pizza shop bobbed in the distance. He surfaced, coughing and blinking through chlorinated water. Charles emerged beside him, clinging to a drifting electrical box. "We're alive." Thomas gasped, then laughed. Not a normal laugh. A weird, bubbling, borderline hysterical kind of laugh. "We just turned an entire city into a swimming pool. I think Choo Choo used soda instead of regular water," Charles choked out. A familiar laugh echoed across the flooded skyline. High-pitched, proud, and just a little insane. On top of a 4-story building stood giant Choo Choo, his wild hair dripping, his lab coat soaked, and a bright pink polka-dot umbrella twirling in his hand. "It worked. My water balloon has made history." "You're insane," Thomas yelled, coughing water. "You flooded the city." Choo Choo shrugged, giggling like a child. Then, like a maniacal penguin, he slid down the rain gutter and landed perfectly onto an inflatable duck float. "A floating city, that's innovation. Come on, kids, help me rebuild. Call it New Venice." "I want to go home," Charles groaned. "There is no home anymore, Charles," Thomas whispered, looking up at the sky. And there it was. Another red balloon. Inflating. A tiny, unmistakable cracking sound reached his ears. Thomas froze, eyes wide, lips barely moving. It's happening again. Thomas didn't blink. His gaze stayed locked on the sky where the second red orb, no, monster, was swelling. Bigger than the last one, much bigger. Its surface shimmered like a soap bubble in the sun, except this one had the mass of a skyscraper and the power to erase zip codes. Charles followed his stare, and for a long moment neither of them said anything. The city was still flooded, buildings half submerged, people kayaking through grocery store aisles. Ducks had officially taken over the courthouse. And yet, there it was again. That sound. Crick, crick, crack, like someone winding back a slingshot aimed straight at their lives. "Nope," Charles finally muttered. "Nope, nope, nope, I'm out. I'm swimming to Canada." "You don't even know which way Canada is," Thomas replied, still staring. "I don't care, as long as it's not UP." Then came the unmistakable, soul-shaking voice of Choo Choo, echoing across the water like some twisted intercom announcement. "Behold Water Balloon 2.0, now with extra elasticity." Thomas groaned. Did he just say extra elasticity? Does that mean it explodes harder? Charles whispered, already paddling with a broken pizza box. Harder, wider, and more cinematically, said a voice right behind them. They turned. It was Choo Choo, floating on his inflatable duck, holding a giant slushie in one hand and a self-destruct remote in the other. Thomas instinctively reached out, trying to knock the remote away, but Choo Choo yanked it back like a toddler guarding candy. No, young man, this is art in motion, precision chaos, controlled catastrophe. Nothing about this is controlled, Thomas snapped. You flooded the mayor's office. I saw him paddle out on his own desk. Choo Choo sipped his slushie, unbothered. Collateral creativity. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need the perfect spot for detonation. Somewhere dramatic, cinematic. Like a disaster movie, Charles muttered. Exactly, Choo Choo beamed. And then he pressed the button. Nothing happened. For a second. Then, the water balloon above them shuddered, groaned, and made a sound Thomas would later describe as a rubber duck being dragged through a black hole. A blast of wind knocked them back. The sky bent. Time wobbled. And then boom. No, not just a boom. A boom that split clouds, cracked windows on mountaintops, and sent waves of water surging across the flooded city like a biblical sequel. This time it wasn't just flooding. It was submersion. Thomas and Charles went under instantly, tumbling like socks in a washing machine. Up was down, left was sideways, and somehow they passed a scuba diver inside a coffee shop. When Thomas surfaced, clinging to a floating vending machine, all he could say was, "We're not a city anymore, we're a sea." Charles bobbed up beside him holding a fish. "I found Nemo," he gasped. Then they both burst into laughter, the kind of laugh that comes when your entire reality has sunk and you're still somehow alive. In the distance, Choo Choo floated past on his duck, arms wide like a conductor in a flooded opera. "You're welcome," he shouted. "I call this Aquatopia." Thomas slumped back on the vending machine, eyes toward the blue, open sky now strangely empty. "No more balloons," he murmured. "Please, no more." Silence. Then the faintest squeaky sound. Both boys froze. Squeak, squeak, squeak. They turned. On the horizon, inflating, was a green balloon. Choo Choo's voice came drifting in on the waves. "Oh, I forgot, there's one more, it's lime-flavored." Thomas sank halfway back into the water. "I hate lime." The lime balloon grew fast. Too fast. Its slick green surface pulsed and shimmered like a radioactive jelly bean. From a distance, it almost looked harmless, like something you'd see at a kid's birthday party, if that party was run by mad scientists and powered by regret. Thomas stared, mouth half open, mind half fried. Charles was still hugging his fish. "I think I blacked out," he mumbled. "Did I dream the fish, or is he real?" He winked at me. Thomas didn't even respond. His gaze was locked on the green monstrosity in the sky. The sheer audacity of that balloon made him feel personally offended. "Why lime?" he finally asked the universe. As if answering, a megaphone crackled from above. "Hello, floating friends." It was Choo Choo again, this time riding a drone the size of a minivan, legs dangling, lab coat flapping in the wind like some demented superhero. "Welcome to Phase 3. Lime is cleansing, lime is balance, lime is—" "Lime is enough," Thomas yelled, finally losing it. "You flooded the city twice, I can still see pizza floating." Charles lifted a slice from the water, took a bite. "Still warm," he noted. Choo Choo ignored them completely. And now behold the lime balloon, designed not to flood but to lift. "Yes, we're going airborne, my children. Gleeful city shall rise into the sky." Thomas blinked. "Wait, lift?" "Oh no," Charles groaned, chewing slowly. The lime balloon didn't burst like the others. It expanded, yes, but then something worse happened. It began to pull. Buildings creaked. Cars groaned. Lampposts bent skyward. And worst of all, the flooded ground beneath them began to ripple upward like a rug being yanked from below. "We're gonna fly," Thomas said in horror. "We're gonna be the first floating Atlantis." "Skylantis," Charles corrected, climbing onto the vending machine. Water drained from the streets in massive spirals. Everything was rising, very slowly but very surely, like the whole city had turned into a hot air balloon. Thomas and Charles clung to the vending machine as it lifted off the water. Wind howled around them. Far below, the edges of the city were cracking like puzzle pieces detaching from the earth. From his drone, Choo Choo threw confetti, actual confetti. Isn't this magical? No, this is the opposite of magical, Thomas screamed over the roar of rising air pressure. They rose past the rooftops, past the clouds. Birds flew alongside them, looking deeply confused. A passing airplane veered off course. Inside one of the high-rise buildings, now floating mid-air, someone was still working on a laptop. They looked out the window, sighed, and closed their screen. Of course. Charles muttered, "If we survive this, I'm switching to online school." And then, as suddenly as it started, everything stopped. The balloon had reached its peak. Gleeful City, now suspended thousands of feet in the sky, wobbled, like a soap bubble on the verge of popping. Thomas swallowed hard. Okay, Charles. Yeah? We need to pop the balloon. Agreed, how? Thomas looked around. We need Choo Choo's remote. Charles followed his gaze. Choo Choo was now doing backflips on the drone, tossing limes into the wind. I don't think he's gonna give it to us. Then we're gonna have to take it. Thomas took a deep breath, stood up on the vending machine, arms spread for balance. You with me? Charles climbed beside him, one arm still holding the fish. Always. They kicked off, using the wind to guide them toward the drone like makeshift sky surfers. Above them, the lime balloon stretched and shimmered, just waiting. Waiting for the final act. Waiting for the pop. The wind howled like a jet engine, as Thomas and Charles coasted through the sky on the back of a vending machine turned makeshift sky surfboard. Below them, the floating remains of Gleeful City bobbed in place, tethered to the giant green balloon by thousands of threads of compressed air pressure and pure chaos. Choo Choo's drone loomed just ahead, a noisy, spinning contraption of metal arms, blinking lights, and what looked suspiciously like blender parts. Thomas squinted into the wind. We get close, I'll go for the remote, you distract him. Charles blinked. How? Thomas looked down at the fish still tucked under Charles's arm. You figure it out. They soared closer. Choo Choo was doing cartwheels on the drone now, his lab coat flapping like a superhero cape made of insanity. Lime is life, lime is flight, he screamed to no one in particular, arms wide open. Thomas launched. He jumped from the vending machine mid-glide, catching onto one of the drone's wobbly legs. The whole thing shook violently, sending sparks and soda cans into the air. Choo Choo turned, startled. You, unbeliever! Me, Thomas growled. Your reign of fruity terror ends now. Choo Choo reached into his coat and pulled out the remote, big, silver, and glowing. It looked like it had been stolen from a movie set. You want this? Choo Choo dangled it from 2 fingers. Then catch! He threw it, straight up. Thomas's eyes went wide. Without thinking, he jumped. He leapt off the drone into open sky, arms stretched, heart pounding, hands grasping. Got it! He caught the remote, then started falling. Wind screamed in his ears. The city above, the earth below, everything spinning. He tucked the remote into his hoodie and braced for a sudden thud. He landed on something soft, squishy, slightly fishy. It was Charles, on the vending machine, holding the fish up like a pillow. See? Charles groaned. Told you I'd figure it out. Thomas gasped. Remote, I have it. Charles pointed up. Then do something, fast. Above them, the lime balloon began to bulge. Not from pressure, but from inside. Something was moving, pulsing. Thomas looked at the remote. A dozen buttons, no labels, just colors. He pressed blue. Nothing. He pressed green. A speaker crackled to life. To deactivate the lime balloon, please select your preferred method. A. Self-destruct. B. Gentle release. C. Emotional closure. Thomas blinked. What? The speaker repeated. Charles leaned in. Try C. Everything about Choo Choo is weird. Maybe this balloon has trust issues. Thomas, too tired to argue, pressed C. A soft hum surrounded them. The balloon glowed faintly. Then, to their shock, a soft, robotic voice echoed from the sky. Lime balloon requires emotional validation before deactivation. Charles stared. I knew it. Thomas sighed. Fine. He looked up at the balloon. This massive floating beast that had nearly drowned, lifted, and destroyed their city. And whispered, You were beautiful. A marvel of engineering and really, really green, but it's time to let go. The balloon shimmered. Then slowly, it began to deflate. Not explode, not crash. Just a drift down, gracefully, like a tired giant finally taking a nap. The city descended with it, settling back onto the earth with a slosh and a collective sigh of relief. Thomas slumped against the vending machine. Charles sat beside him, the fish in his lap. They watched as Choo Choo floated by on his drone, arms crossed, muttering, "Next time, strawberry." Thomas didn't even react. He just closed his eyes. The sun came out. A rainbow arched across the sky. And somewhere, somehow, the vending machine dinged. Free soda. Charles popped one open, took a sip, and said, "Best apocalypse ever."